special Habersham History Talks event. You're in for a very captivating story. I'm Anna Sliles. I chair the Habersham History Talks group, and it's a group of very enthusiastic lovers of history. And a little bit more about Habersham History Talks. If you're interested in joining, we would love to have you. Our team identifies and recruits wonderful speakers that speak about all types of historical topics of the Lowcountry. We also have some fun outings as well. So if you're interested, please come see me after this event. We'd love to have you join. Before I introduce our moderator, a few housekeeping comments. Please make sure your cell phone is off. The event will be recorded thanks to Laura Schuler in the back, and you will receive a link from Bar Foy with the recording of the event. So that will be great. There will also be about 15 minutes where you can ask questions of Tom Austin. So hold the questions till the end of the event. And then also, even though Tom is in the process of writing a book on Sea Island cotton, there are a couple of books on Sea Island cotton over here that Debbie Schaefer will be over there after the event. And if you're interested in ordering one, you can do so. All right, so before we go any further, let me introduce our moderator for the evening. A member of Habersham History Talks and also a Habersham resident, our own Rob Hendricks. Rob, who many of you know, is a Brit by birth. He had a military father, so he grew up really moving around, mostly in the U.S. and Japan. He worked as an economist, land use planner, National Forest Staff officer, and a historian and senior advisor on the international forest policy for the State Department and the UN. He is also living now in Habersham, been here for 9 years, and is married to his wonderful wife, Ann Munger. He has 2 children who live in LA and work in the movie industry. Rob's first memory of being interested in history and geography was his childhood stamp collection. Did any of you have a stamp collection? I did, okay. And there he questioned, why is Switzerland called Helvetica? Or, quite frankly, where is the British Empire? So please welcome our moderator for this special evening, Rob Hendricks.
And again, thank you for coming and being interested in where you live. We've got a special treat tonight, both in topic and present. We're going to be talking about Sea Island cotton, a crop that was grown for about 150 years. The reason we're here probably is Sea Island cotton. All that beautiful architecture was paid by Sea Island cotton. And this goes on and on. But it did not last forever. It collapsed. But it still lingers in its impact on our culture, social economics, and on our actual landscape. You go out and look at the forest, that forest is not the same as it was 300 years ago. If you look at the watersheds and the dynamics of hydrology in the area, it's different because of the significant modifications to the landscape in order to grow that cotton. The presenter, Tom Austin, is a single guy from Somerville, South Carolina. At least grew up there. He's connected to a family that's on Edisto, where he works now. It goes back 12 generations. He's now a professional conservationist. He got his degree from Clemson University. He works for the Edisto Land Trust, and pretty much that's what he'll show the connection to that tonight to us and how it interprets with respect to Sea Island cotton. More importantly, from what I first detected when I heard his first talk, is a person who is generating new knowledge. He's not just taking someone else's script. You're going to hear a lot about how he's generating and recovering old lost knowledge, and more people like that need to be around. And we've been encouraging them to write that book, and a good audience like this is telling him, he told us, maybe I should write that book. Let's see, again, in terms of the way we're gonna run the meeting, Tom will do his talk. In order to keep the timeline and his flow, let's hold the discussion until later. The last time we had a number of questions, so I think you'll find that you have some questions. And I'll start off with an interesting thing, I think. This is a flower of Sea Island cotton. Does it remind you of anything? Hibiscus. Which I'm really surprised at. It's part of the mallow family of plants. And when you're walking to the pool on the road in the bend, near the cattails, you'll see hibiscus blooming. Those are marshmallows, which the French figured out how to make popular, taking the roots, whipping them up with sugar and confection, and we got the marshmallow. So it's another way of remembering Sea Island cotton and the flower that is part of it. So without any further ado, our star.
Thank you all for the warm welcome and for inviting me down here to Habersham. Today I'm going to be presenting to you my work in resurrecting Sea Island cotton down on Edisto Island. But before we can get into my project and my story with Sea Island cotton, we have a lot of background information we have to get into in order for you to really have the full context behind why this project is important. So a little bit more about me. My degree is in wildlife and fisheries biology from Clemson. I graduated in 2016. I work as a professional conservationist and ecologist for the Edisto Island Open Land Trust. I'm an expert naturalist. I'm on the board of the Carolina Butterfly Society, or president of the Carolina Butterfly Society now. I keep electing president of things. And I'm also a board member of the South Carolina Association of Naturalists. I'm an independent researcher. I published several entomological research articles over the last couple of years, and I have several ongoing projects in that field. I'm a soon-to-be author, not on the Sea Island cotton, that's coming later, but on the subject of the flora and fauna of Edisto Island. I am an 11th generation Edistonian. If you count the guy who stepped off of the boat, that makes me a 12th generation Edistonian. I am a man of esoteric interests and eclectic hobbies, which is what brings me here today. So I say all of this not to brag, but because I want you to note that the things I did not list. I am not a historian, I'm not a farmer, and I'm not a horticulturalist. I am learning all about this project and assembling information about Sea Island cotton as I go. Because of that, I assuredly got something somewhere wrong along the way, so if you know of a better source, a better reference, some other information I should look into, please tell me, because I probably just don't know about it. So take everything what I'm about to show you here today with a fistful of salt, because I'm not a historian, I don't have that background, and I haven't yet fully dug in and done all of the research and legwork needed to really prove out much of this new work that I'm doing. Additionally, the foundation, the framework for a lot of the information I'm going to be sharing with you today comes from Dr. Porcher's 2005 book, The Story of Sea Island Cotton, which is really the de facto treatise on the subject of Sea Island cotton. I believe we have some copies of that for sale over there. That is the main source of a lot of the historical context I'm going to be presenting to you here today. And I've also pulled in a lot of information from other primary and secondary sources. I have not yet made a full citation list for this PowerPoint. I'll get to that eventually. But it's not just Dr. Porcher's book, but there's also several other references and other historical accounts that I've pulled in to really assemble a lot of this knowledge. Also, I would be remiss not to talk about who my employer is, because they're paying me to be here today. But I work for the Edisto Island Open Land Trust. We are Edisto Island's local land trust. There's really only 2 local land trusts left in the state of South Carolina. Pretty much every other land trust operates at least the scale of an entire county. We cover just kind of the south corner of Charleston County and a little bit of Colleton County. We were founded in 1994 to preserve the real quality of life on Edisto Island by protecting lands, waterways, scenic vistas, and heritage through conservation and education. Been here 7 years, I still don't have that memorized. I'll get to it eventually. We help landowners conserve their land through voluntary conservation easements, and additionally, we provide education to homeowners, landowners, and residents of Edisto Island about environmental issues and ways that they can better manage their land and better care and steward for ecosystems, wildlife, and the environments on Edisto Island. I have a lot of extra materials over there about the Edison Island Land Trust and what we do. So if you're interested in that day and greet, please come over and grab one after the presentation. Additionally, part of what we do is community conservation. This is the concept of blending the mission of our land trust, the conservation values we're looking to protect in the landscape where we work, with the needs of our community where we also work. And one of the community conservation projects that we've been working on for the last, coming up on 10 years now, 9 years this year, is the Hutchinson House. This is a Freedman cottage built circa 1885 by Henry Hutchinson on Edisto Island. The land that the house is built on was purchased by his father, Jim Hutchinson, in 1875. The house was added to the National Register of Historic Places in kind of an omnibus application done in 1987. In 2016, the Edisto Island Land Trust bought the house off the open market. Up to that point, it had been in Hutchinson family hands all the way to there. It eventually, there was a rapid chain of succession, and it ended up in an heir's hands who no longer left the state, didn't have the same connection to the house, and listed the house for sale on the open market. We stepped up to the plate to buy the house, take it off the market, and try and find someone who would help stabilize and restore the house. And lo and behold, we ended up being the one to do that. We've been working with the Hutchinson family hand in hand since 2016 to preserve, catalog, and interpret their history. We do not want to tell the story of the Hutchinson family without the Hutchinson family there at the table to tell us what it really is, to provide us with the information from their own family collections, their own oral history, so that we can really interpret and preserve the history of this house, of this family, and of Edisto Island. In 2019, we purchased the adjacent 9 acres to the house, bringing up our total land holdings around the house now to about 18 acres. And today in 2024, we are working on I believe it's the 3rd phase of restoration for the house. We are putting the wraparound porches back on the house. That photo up there in the top right is the oldest known photo we have of the house, circa 1900. And we are restoring the house as close to that configuration and using whatever other research and investigatory techniques that we have at our disposal to see what the original condition of the house is from the remains and the details left behind in the house itself. We're trying to bring it as close to 1885 as we can, but that's the oldest known photo that we have of it. And so down here on the right is how the house looked about 6 months ago. We now have the entire porch frame. They are hanging up the gingerbread molding as we speak today. I just saw it this afternoon. It is an amazing sight to behold. And this is a 3D rendering of what the house is going to be restored back to, hopefully by the end of this year. So in order to talk about the Hutchinson House, I also have to talk about who the Hutchinson family were. So the patriarch of the Hutchinson family is James, better known as Jim Hutchinson. He was born enslaved in about 1836. He became a Civil War veteran during the Civil War. He was actually instrumental in the reporting of 9 Confederate spies that were positioned on Edisto Island, reporting the movements of the Union Navy out of Port Royal. One of those Confederate spies actually ended up being his half-white brother, Townsend Michael. It's an interesting connection there in that family history as well as on the island. After the war, he became a sea island cotton farmer. He also was a social activist, a politician, and an entrepreneur. He co-founded the first black-owned steamboat company on Edisto Island, which before 1920, there was no road on Edisto Island. Everything that came on and off the island came by boat. So the fact that he had his own steamboat company was absolutely instrumental in securing his family, his friends, his community, the best prices they could get by shipping goods on and off the island to Charleston Harbor. Most importantly and relevant to the history of the Hutchinson House is that he organized freedmen land co-ops to buy whole plantations that went up for foreclosure sale. And so he purchased about just under a 400-acre plantation off of Eddingsville Beach Road, as well as a 404-acre plantation off of Point-of-Pines Road. And the land that he purchased in that second co-op is where the Hutchinson House was built and where it currently stands today. Regrettably, in July 4th, 1885, Jim was shot dead in the yard of his own son by a white man from Wamwam named William Barth. Barth was arrested, tried, and convicted of manslaughter, but he was acquitted by an all-white jury the following year. But to continue on the legacy of his father, Henry Hutchinson also worked to improve his community and improve the lives of his neighbors and of his family through running an agricultural co-op for Sea Island cotton. So he was able, He ran his own gin house, which was able to process, package, and ship all of the cotton. Because he had that interest in that Blackwood Steamboat Company, he was now able to ship cotton directly to market without having to pay fares to someone else to ship that cotton. Additionally, he pooled all of the cotton from all of his neighbors together so that he could sort and grade it all together into kind of higher resolution bags and that kind of thing. He was also dealing in bulk, and because of that, he could get better loan rates from factors, which was able to consolidate everyone's loans. And so he sort of played the middleman, the organizer for this co-op that kind of all of the local farmers around flowed through him, and then he sent the cotton to market, and then he sent the proceeds back to them based off of what they had produced that year. The story of the Hutchinson family continues past Henry. Two of his daughters, Lula and Mabel, were both school teachers. Lula actually taught elementary school on Edisto Island for 55 years straight. So she taught over 3 generations of Edistonians how to read and write, which she had a major and disproportionate impact on her community on Edisto Island. And to this day, the Hutchinson family some of them are still on Edisto Island, and they are still thoroughly involved in this project. Just recently, they created the Hutchinson Heritage Foundation, which is working to preserve, catalog, and collect all of their collective histories together, their oral histories, and preserve that for future generations. And we're working with them to incorporate that into our interpretation of the house. So, the connection between the Hutchinson House and the Sea Island cotton is through Henry Hutchinson and his gin house. So, backing up a little bit, Sea Island cotton is core to the history of all of Edisto. It's core to the history of most of the Sea Islands, but particularly Edisto Island, because we were one of the major Sea Island cotton producing islands, and we did not have rice cultivation on Edisto Island. So Sea Island cotton was really the driving force of the economy on Edisto Island. Sea Island cotton was also grown in the Lowcountry for about 150 years. From 1790 all the way to 1940. Most people have only ever heard of the first 75 years of the story of Sea Island cotton. That's when it was grown under the plantation system on plantations up until the Civil War. However, Sea Island cotton continued to be planted extensively all throughout the Lowcountry of South Carolina following the Civil War. From 1865 all the way to 1940, it was grown by Lowcountry freedmen in the Sea Islands of South Carolina and Georgia. Freedmen just like Henry and Jim Hutchinson. Jim sought economic success for his family and others during Reconstruction by getting them land so that they could grow Sea Island cotton, generate cash to send their kids to school in order to improve their standard of living. And Henry's livelihood revolved around his agricultural co-op that grew and processed Sea Island cotton and was able to sell that at a higher price to market than what independent farmers would have been able to do themselves. The story of Sea Island cotton is an inseparable piece of the interpretation and the history of the Hutchinson house. And over here on the right, in the top left, that is a photo of the gin house that they had next to the house. We believe that was also taken at the same time as that other photo I showed you, sort of 1900. Over there on the right, there's a photo from Henry Hutchinson about 1920 out in the field of Sea Island cotton. That photo is cropped, but just to his right, you can see the top corner of that gin house out there as well. And then down here, we have four newspaper articles from the Charleston newspaper. 3 of them are about Henry Hutchinson delivering the first bale of cotton to the Charleston market for multiple years running. So he was beating out all of the plantations to get the first bale of cotton to market, which is incredibly impressive. And additionally, he wasn't producing just any cotton. He was producing, extra long staple, extra fine cotton. He was producing top shelf product. He had a brand, he had a reputation, and he was delivering products to market faster than anyone else could. So he was serious about this, and his co-op was able to outcompete a lot of plantations during the Reconstruction era. And so now that we know a little bit about the house and about the land trust and why we're doing this project, we need to know what Sea Island cotton actually is. So Sea Island cotton is an improved day-neutral flowering cultivar of the tropical and perennial long staple cotton, Gossypium barbadense. There are a lot of 25 and 10-cent words in there, so I'll be back to explain a little bit. So a day-neutral flowering plant is a plant that doesn't care how long the day is. It gets to a certain size and then it just starts flowering. The original long staple cotton was a tropical plant, and it based its flowering time off of photo period, how long the day was. And because it was a tropical plant, it tried to bloom in the dry season, which when you move it up here into the subtropical zone, ends up being winter. And so the plants would wait until about October before they would start blooming, And when they wouldn't have enough time to mature those bolls and produce the fruit before the frost would kill them. So there was no way for people to actually make a crop of long staple cotton here in the Sea Islands of South Carolina and Georgia, because the frost was always soon enough and always just enough to kill the plants back down to the roots. Over the course of about 10 years during the 1780s up to the beginning of the 1790s, people were able to select for Sea Island cotton with long staple cotton with day neutrality, and from those plants, those became the progenitors of what we call today Sea Island cotton. Key thing to note is that Sea Island cotton is a descendant of long staple cotton. Long staple cotton is a completely unrelated species from upland cotton, which is what's grown today and was grown historically all throughout the Midlands of South Carolina as well as all of the Southeast. Upland cotton is a much smaller plant, it grows a lot faster, it tolerates a lot wider range of soils and climates and growing conditions. And that's what became the modern cotton that we all know about, that's grown extensively throughout the Southeast. Sea Island cotton was developed pretty much at the exact same time that upland cotton was, but it was really well adapted to the Sea Islands of South Carolina and Georgia, and so it was grown nowhere else. If upland cotton had been developed a little bit earlier, we may have never had Sea Island cotton. But they're two completely separate species from two different wild plants that were both developed independently by Native Americans and by colonists. Comparing the two plants, upland cotton is Sea Island cotton is a much larger plant. It lacks hairs on its stems. That's kind of the key botanical difference between the two. Pacific hirsutum means hairy cotton. Sea Island cotton has teardrop-shaped leaves, as you can see, or teardrop-shaped bolls, as you can see up here. Upland cotton tends to have round spherical bolls. Sea Island cotton tends to have 5-lobed leaves, whereas upland cotton tends to have 3-lobed. The fibers, of course, in Sea Island cotton are much longer and much finer. They tend to be about half as thick and about twice as long as that of upland cottons. Sea Island cotton has pastel yellow flowers, whereas upland cotton tends to have white or pink flowers. Sea Island cotton is far more picky about soil and climate than upland cotton. Upland cotton can be grown in a much wider array of soils and climatic conditions. Additionally, Sea Island cotton has black, hard seeds, and the fibers come out of just the tips of the seed and one seam along one side, whereas upland cotton is just a big fuzzball. You've got a small green soft seed that has hairs coming out of every corner of the entire seed, and that's key to how the two cottons are processed. Sea Island cotton really needs that long growing season that we have here on the Sea Islands. It also really does well on our well-drained sandy soils. We also have very young soils here compared to a lot of the southeast, because we are so close to the coastal plain. Our soils are only in the tens of thousands of years old rather than hundreds of thousands of years old. So there's far more nutritious, there's more nutrients available, and Sea Island cotton is able to take advantage of that more than upland cotton. Additionally, heat and humidity are really good for the growth of Sea Island cotton. If you know anything about the Lowcountry, you have a lot of heat and humidity, so that's why it did so well here. The product itself, this is what people were actually concerned with, which is the fibers that are grown out of the seed coat, the lint. Sea Island cotton, as I said earlier, were twice as long, about half as thick, but it still retained a lot of the same tensile strength. So you could spin a thread that was thinner, but just as strong as that of an upland cotton. That meant that you could spin thinner and thinner laces, thinner and thinner textiles, and you could use it for stronger and stronger ropes that still had a much greater strength to weight ratio. Sea Island cotton was prized by the royalty and the nobility in Europe for spinning or for weaving the finest laces and the most exquisite clothing. However, it also had a lot of practical engineering applications during the Industrial Revolution. It was used in the first bias-ply tires on the first cars. It was used in the first parachute cords, excuse me. It was used to sew together hot air balloons and airplane skins. It was also used in higher RPM drive belts because you had a more lightweight belt that had the same strength. So you could then spin that belt faster with simplified drivetrains and increase the efficiency of machinery. So Sea Island cotton wasn't just used for the clothing of kings and queens, it was also used for some practical purposes all the way up until the First World War. Sea Island cotton as a cash crop was grown under the plantation system at the plantation scale. It was the dominant upland crop on the Sea Islands. Almost every acre of land on Edisto Island, as well as much of Beaufort, Johns Island, James Island, as well as all the way down through Savannah, was plowed up and planted in Sea Island cotton. All the freshwater wetlands on Edisto Island were ditched, diked, and drained to dry the cotton for soil, and anything that couldn't be planted in the very few spots where rice could be grown on Edisto Island, it was put in Sea Island cotton. They even diked off and held off the tides so that they could desalinate and plant high salt marsh on Edisto Island. Thousands of acres of marshlands were planted on Edisto Island in the early to mid 1800s. Harvesting of Sea Island cotton lasted from August all the way to December. It's not like modern cotton where they would grow it to a certain point and then come in, defoliate it, and harvest it. It was a crop that was continuously picked all the way from August all the way until the first frost. The seed cotton itself, which is the cotton straight out of the boll, had to be dried, it had to be sorted, it had to be whipped, ginned, molded, packed, and shipped, which is just a fancy way of saying that they had to process it all, clean it up, and then package it for market. Additionally, Sea Island cotton had to be ginned on a roller gin, which I have a sort of demonstration example of over there, and we'll drill into that a little bit more later, which is very different from the gin that Eli Whitney did. I'll dive into that here in a second. But once the cotton was packed, it was shipped to a factor. The factor operated as the farmer's lender, as their banker, as their investor. So they would give the farmer a loan at the start of the season. The farmer would use that to buy everything they needed to grow cotton. And then at the end of the year, they would pay the factor back with bales of cotton. And then any excess, they would either have a fixed rate that he would buy it at, or he would act as their broker to get them the highest price that he could, taking a cut from the deal. And then the factor would also sit on these bales of cotton in the warehouses in Charleston or in Savannah and play the global market, trying to max price they possibly could, because cotton was not a perishable good. So they could hold on to it and wait until there was a supply limitation, and then they could sell that cotton for a higher price per bale. So, bone I have to pick with Eli Whitney is that he did not invent the cotton gin. He invented a cotton gin, one singular cotton gin. He invented the saw gin. The saw gin was absolutely instrumental in the processing of upland cotton, because upland cotton, as I explained before, has a very small, soft seed, and it has hair coming out of all sides of that seed. If you feed one of those into a roller gin, it just grabs the lint, smashes the seed, and kicks it out the other side. However, long staple cotton has a very long, fine fiber that is very just loosely attached to the seed. It has this big, large, hard seed. So you can feed it in between a set of rollers, and it just gently pulls the fiber off, and the seed just falls away on the front. The roller gin is a very old design dating back to at least 1300 AD, if not 500 AD from India. And Sea Island cotton very early on was ginned on gins just like these up here. This is the original Churka gin from India, and this is sort of a more modern roller gin from probably the late 1700s, early 1800s. And they had much larger, pulley-driven, large industrial gins as well. But that was sort of the smaller cottage-sized gin. And then down here I have some examples of how the saw gin worked. It had a set of hooks, which were kind of like a saw blade that would move through a set of combs. It would grab the fiber, rip it off of the seed as it pulled it through those hooks. If you put Sea Island cotton into the saw gin, the hooks grab it, rip the fiber in half, and it kicks out the world's most expensive upland cotton out of the other side. So no one in the right mind would ever gin Sea Island cotton on a saw gin. Nowadays, modern saw gins and modern roller gins can do both types of cotton because they're computer controlled and hyper engineered. But back in the old days, saw gins were exclusively for upland cotton, and roller gins were exclusively for long staple cottons. Stated before, Sea Island cotton was developed on the Sea Islands about 1790. It likely originated from a Caribbean cultivar. So Sea Island cotton didn't just come out of the blue. It came from already improved versions of long staple cotton. They had originally been moved to the Caribbean by Native Americans from most likely Ecuador or the Andes Mountains. And there they were improved as yard plants. They grow them like a hibiscus as a perennial, and they would just pick cotton off of them in winter and use that for their own needs. These were further improved by colonists for use in the plantation economy, growing perennial long staple plants in the Caribbean, and seeds were taken from those plants, brought to the Sea Islands, and then they beat that day neutrality into it to turn it into an annual plant, which is what we needed to grow it here on Sea Islands in South Carolina. That's where Sea Island cotton was born. From there, it was perfected on Edisto and Johns Island. This was kind of the nexus where all of the major improvements really early on in Sea Island cotton were done. But after about 30 years, everyone had kind of figured out the secret of seed selection and how to actually do it, or how to actually get the most that they could, and everyone kind of had their own pet strain. There were a few dominant plantations that sprung up across the Sea Islands that really had the best of the best. But really early progress was made on Johns and Edisto Islands. In the very early 1800s, there was a gold rush-like scramble to put as much acreage in Sea Island cotton as possible. The indigo market had just collapsed because the British Empire was paying a premium to the colonies to grow cotton to grow indigo because they needed the dye, and they were currently at war with Spain and the French, who controlled all of the indigo exports from the Caribbean and Central America. Then we started shooting at the British, so they stopped paying us extra money for our indigo. And so the colonists, after the Revolutionary War, they needed another upland crop because indigo was no longer profitable to be grown in the colonies. And once Sea Island cotton came around, as well as upland cotton, there was a mad dash to grow as much. And Sea Island cotton commanded by far the highest price per bale because of its very long, very fine fiber. So that was the Bitcoin of its day. That's where everyone was putting all of their speculative investments. So hundreds of plantations sprung up on the Sea Islands. Here is an old plantation map of Edisto Island. There's at least 60 plantations just there. These plantations were on average about 200 to 400 acres in size, whereas previously they were closer to about 1,000. And that was sort of the manageable level that one person could do financially for Sea Island cotton. Some people own multiple plantations, but they generally weren't large, expansive Sea Island cotton plantations. They were sort of smaller, compartmentalized plantations scattered around. Early cultivation focused on making the most supreme fiber to chase the highest price per pound that they could get for cotton. But as the market began to saturize and a few planters had really developed a perfected strain and they had developed their brand and their reputation, had their contacts in England, they were the only ones getting the really high dollar prices per bale, and then everyone else was kind of competing for the middle. So at that point, the market shifted to producing as much cotton as possible, and prices started to diminish because there was more supply than there was demand for the most part. During the Civil War, Sea Island cotton production all but ceased in some areas of the Lowcountry. Some areas continued to produce it. Places like Beaufort, Edisto Island were occupied by the Union Navy, and so it was no longer being produced. But the industry was about 1/10 of what it was before the war. Following the Civil War, Sea Island cotton continued to be grown extensively on the Sea Islands of South Carolina and Georgia. Much was grown underneath the plantation sharecropping system. However, a great deal of it, especially on Edisto Island, was now being grown by independent freedmen farmers, including the Hutchinsons. By the late 1800s, Sea Island cotton prices began to decline as U.S. cotton faced competition from Egypt. Egypt had developed their own strain of long staple cotton they had managed to get. They'd imported some Sea Island cotton seeds and created their own hybrids with African cottons. So they were now competing for the bottom of the market with independent farmers in U.S. southeastern states. And as they slowly developed their economy and improved their varieties and started producing a better product, they started taking the Sea Island cotton industry from the bottom up. And so they were competing with all of the small farmers and eventually all of the medium-sized plantations for the bulk of the long staple industry. Then in about 1900, the boll weevil started spreading into the southeastern United States. Boll weevil is a small species of weevil about the size of a grain of rice that is native to Central America. It co-adapted with upland cotton and long staple cottons and was a natural pest to these species. But it was only able to exist where cotton grew naturally in Central America and South America. Well, we proceeded to plant a continuous belt of cotton all the way from Virginia to the Rio Grande Valley, where the boll weevil naturally exists. And like wildfire, it spread up the East Coast all the way to Virginia by 1922. It spanned about 30 years and it spanned the entirety of the United States. In about 1918, it reached Edisto Island. It hit Beaufort in 1917. And within a few years, it had decimated the entirety of the Sea Island cotton industry. The boll weevil lays eggs inside the developing cotton boll, and the larvae of the boll weevil feed on the developing fibers and developing seeds. And so the little worms move around and they cut up the fiber as they feed. And so it doesn't kill the plant. It doesn't make the plant look any less healthy, other than it does drop a lot of bolls in order to try and get rid of these pests. But eventually, when those bolls open and you go to collect the fiber, it's a bunch of nasty, rotten, torn up, cut up fiber. And so there's no product for the farmer at the end of the year. So they plant cotton and they wait an entire year and they get nothing at the end of it. So it became entirely unprofitable to grow Sea Island cotton anywhere in the United States after the boll weevil arrived, which is why the industry completely collapsed. Because upland cotton was able to hang on for a lot longer because there were isolated places where boll weevil didn't exist. It was naturally a little bit more resistant As an industry, as a plant itself, to the damage of the boll weevil, it was still impacted greatly, but it was able to limp along for about another 50 years. I'll hit this bottom part quick real first. In the late 1970s, the USDA started a boll weevil eradication program to try and eliminate the boll weevil from the United States, and they were stupendously successful. In a matter of about 40 years, they had eradicated the boll weevil from the United States, and they did that through a coordinated effort of both insecticides as well as just paying farmers to not grow cotton for about 5 years. Boll weevils only can live for about 2 to 3 years in the soil, and they can only survive by eating cotton plants. So if you eliminate cotton plants from the landscape and just wait long enough, they all disappear, and you can go back to planting cotton. And so the USDA would put out boll weevil monitoring traps, and they would go around and check these, and so if they had an outbreak show up, people would not stop and not plant cotton for another 5 years. They would kill out the boll weevil, and they systematically did this all throughout the United States. Within 40 years, they'd eliminated it from everywhere except for the Rio Grande Valley in Texas. And so the war with boll weevil still continues to this day, but for the most part, it has been eradicated from practically all the United States. With interstate commerce and everything, and people driving from Texas to wherever in a matter of a couple of hours, there's always a chance that boll weevil can get stuck in the radiator of an 18-wheeler and jump out of a truck stop and reestablish, which is why the USDA continues to monitor boll weevils and why pretty much all of the U.S. is still underneath the boll weevil quarantine. Jumping back to sea island cotton, the USDA tried in the 1930s to try and reestablish sea island cotton after it languished for about 15 or so years between when the boll weevil arrived until the 1930s. They distributed a lot of sea island cottonseed to small farmers from the Sea Islands of South Carolina all the way to the Panhandle of North Florida, and the plants did really well. They grew really well, but they still got decimated by the boll weevil. Through coordinated efforts, they were able to get a little bit more productivity out of it than just letting the boll weevil run rampant. But the real problem they ran into is that there were people planting upland cotton on the exact same landscape as the people planting sea island cotton. And so the two plants can hybridize. When you get a hybrid between the two, it's generally worse off than either plant. Because, you know, it's big, it's tall, it's leggy, it takes up a lot of room like a sea island cotton, and then it produces upland cotton fibers. And so hybrid plants are not desirable, they're also very unpredictable. So you can have a really good sea island cotton cultivar and a really good upland cotton cultivar, but the hybridizing is just a complete mutt with random characteristics from the parent plants. So because of that, if you couldn't keep your plants separated from your neighbor's plants, bees and butterflies and wasps would carry pollen from one plant to another, and then you would end up with hybrids in your field. Even if you could keep your plants separated, you still had to bring them to the same gin house as your neighbors. And then they were ginning that on their own gins. Generally it was a saw gin, so then you were doing damaged discounted lint. And then there was always upland cotton seeds that got mixed into yours. And so you plant the next year when you got your seed back, there'd be a couple upland cotton plants, they'd hybridize, and the next year after that, the plants would all be hybrids, and you would no longer be able to produce a pure sea island cotton crop. So that effort fell apart from the USDA in about the mid-1930s, but at about the same time, they started up a research station in Florence, South Carolina, PD research station. And they were trying to breed boll weevil resistant strains of sea island cotton. They quickly shifted over to trying to create hybrid plants that had the best of both worlds between the two. And then about 1939, they moved their efforts to Johns Island because Florence was just a little too chilly and they didn't have that long growing season they needed. Johns Island worked out well, but the whole sea island cotton hybrid thing wasn't working out, so instead they packed up those efforts in 1942 and moved them to, I think, Tipton, Georgia. And they shifted to trying to pull in desirable genes out of sea island cotton and get them into new hybrid upland cotton plants. And at that point, pure sea island cotton ceased to be grown in cultivation. It was assumed at that point, other than a few strains being grown here and there as heirloom plants, it became extinct as a plant. No one was practicing seed selection anymore. No one was checking for hybridization. No one was keeping these plants separate from anything else. It still survived its genetics in Egyptian cotton, which then was also used to create modern Pima cotton, which is called American Egyptian cotton, both of which are direct descendants of sea island cotton. But pure sea island cotton at that point ceased to exist. And that's what people thought. So we can't talk about sea island cotton without also talking about the consequences that it had for the Lowcountry of South Carolina. The production of sea island cotton, like all plantation cash crops, took an immeasurable toll on the lives of hundreds of thousands of enslaved men and women. Planter efforts to preserve the sea island cotton economy, dependent on Charleston Harbor, likely fueled the events that precipitated the Civil War. Sea island cotton also left an indelible mark on our geology, on our hydrology, and on our ecology here in the South Carolina Sea Islands. For example, on Edisto Island, my home turf, it was practically scraped bare of trees. There's anecdotal reports of people being able to sit on the porch of Seabrook Plantation, which is on the north end of the island, and look into the Atlantic Ocean 5 miles away because there was not a tree between them and the ocean. That, Edisto Island is about a 65 square mile island. So that tells you the sheer scale of agriculture that was going on in the pursuit of sea island cotton. Additionally, all of the wetlands were ditched and drained that changed our natural hydrology. Great expanses of salt marsh had dikes built around them, and they were also ditched, drained, and desalinated to create cotton fields. This fundamentally altered the landscape of Edisto Island, as well as many of the sea islands. These historical practices extirpated certain species from Edisto Island as well. Being in agriculture for 350 years doesn't leave a lot of room for a lot of native plants. So there are biodiversity holes I've noticed on certain sea islands. Some sea islands don't have one species, some don't have another. But you might find a few glimmers of them on the sides of, particularly remote wetlands or small isolated islands that were kind of the last to go into agriculture and the first to come out. And so the sheer damage that it has caused to the ecosystems of the sea islands really isn't all that well documented, because people have not really been looking into exactly what the differences are in our natural worlds before and after sea island cotton. We just don't have a good account of what things were like before agriculture and the colonial period even started. Sea island cotton cultivation left a lasting mark upon all facets of the Lowcountry, not just our history, not just our communities, not just our peoples, also our hydrology, our geology, the entire landscape, the entire Lowcountry itself. And now you finally have the invaluable historical context of sea island cotton. Sea island cotton was a cash crop endemic to the sea islands of South Carolina and Georgia. It was the most common upland plant on the sea islands for over a century. There was more cotton on the ground than there were pine trees, and there was grass. Let that sink in. There's probably a little bit more cordgrass out in the marshes than there was sea island cotton, but on the uplands, it was by far the most dominant plant, period. The sea island economies revolved entirely around the cultivation of this plant, particularly on Edisto Island where we didn't have rice cultivation. Millions of people spent their entire lives cultivating this crop. Many enslaved people suffered for it, and many freedmen found their prosperity with it. The very ground we walk out here, everywhere we go, was turned over countless times in the pursuit of growing the sea island cotton. The landscape we still live in today is influenced by its scarring infrastructure. Then, for the span of just a few decades, it up and disappeared from everywhere. We cannot understand our past here in the Lowcountry if we don't understand sea island cotton. Sea island cotton is the thread that stitches the long history of the Lowcountry together. With that, I can finally start talking about my project to resurrect sea island cotton. I'll take a break real quick. So, the reason behind why we started working on this project, Preserve Sea Island Cotton, is because of the Hutchinson. So in 2016, we bought the house and we started efforts to fundraise in order to get the funds to restore the house. In 2017, I started working for the Land Trust as their property manager as well as their property steward. So I go out and monitor, or back then, I went out and monitored all of our conservation properties and I took care of all the lands that we owned outright, which included the Hutchinson house. The Hutchinson house at that point was really the only place that we had open acreage where we could really do anything. So I spent a whole lot of time out there working on things like pollinator gardens and mowing the grass, lots and lots of grass. But in late 2018, Bill McLean, a real estate attorney from downtown Charleston, approached us out of the blue and he claimed to be growing true blue sea island cotton, the extinct sea island cotton that no one had been growing for the last 80 years. And he had seeds and he was willing to give them to us so that we could grow them for the Hutchinson House project as part of our demonstration, since it was such a key part of the history of the house. From that, I was tasked with growing out, creating an interpretive plot of sea island cotton. And when I went into this, I assumed that this was absolutely, beyond a doubt, not sea island cotton. I was going to set out to prove that it wasn't, or prove that it was, because if I was going to tell people this was sea island cotton, I wanted to be absolutely certain that it was, because I don't like lying to people. But after that, just a couple months after that, actually, in 2019, I was hired on full-time with the Land Trust, so I had a lot more free time that I was able to put towards projects like this, so I dove into it head first. And then now in 2024, a restoration of the house is in full swing, and I'm 6 years into this project. So, the question that was on everyone's mind at the time, was on my mind, was on all of your minds, is this really Sea Island cotton that we're working with on Edisto? Surprisingly, all evidence right now points to yes. So here is just a quick little map of my provenance, and I'll explain this in detail on the next slide. But that's the baggie of Ziploc bag full of seeds I got from Bill in a parking lot late at night someplace. But generally, when you get Ziploc bags full of plant pieces, it's usually not Sea Island cotton. But anyway, I swear, officer. So over here in the middle, this is where his seeds came from. This is the U.S. National Plant Germplasm System. The key things I have marked in there: the date it arrived in 1939, and the name of the accession, the seeds in the storage facility, was labeled as Bleak Hall Sea Island. Now there's about 100 things in there that are labeled Sea Island cotton. Basically, none of them are Sea Island cotton because they've come from every different corner of the earth and they have no provenance data associated with it. This one had basically no data with it other than the date, where it was currently located, and that it was called Bleak Hall Sea Island. From that, I was able to do a little bit of research and find the information about the USDA's cotton breeding research at the Florence Research Station, which is what that article over there is out of. And I also emailed the folks at the USDA and asked about this accession, and they went on Google Scholar and found that it had been used in this 2001 genetic study mapping the interrelatedness of upland cottons as well as sea island cottons. Because I was assuming that this plant was a hybrid and that it was not a pure sea island cotton. It had some amount of upland cotton in it. So this was absolutely groundbreaking to see, because this paper here was specifically trying to show which of these long staple cottons and which of these upland cottons had what amount of hybridization between the two of them. And you notice down here at the very corner, as far away from as it can get from everything, and as far away from the upland cottons is my Bleak Hall Sea Island, as well as the Seabrook Sea Island, which is on the other side of Edisto Island and the other major cotton plantation on Edisto Island. So, kind of all that in a lot more words is, in 1939, the USDA put this Bleak Hall strain of sea island into cryo storage. Around the same time, they also packed up and moved their breeding facility from Florence to Johns Island. I don't think it's a coincidence that in 1939, this ended up in USDA care, which was the exact same time that they closed up their shop at the PD research station. That would have been a perfect time to take all of those seeds you were working with and put them into cryo storage. Bleak Hall Plantation is a plantation on Edisto Island. If you know about Botany Bay Plantation on Edisto Island, the DNR managed publicly accessible property, that is actually a conglomeration of Jackdaw, Sea Cloud, and Bleak Hall Plantation. Bleak Hall being the plantation on the beachfront where the Boneyard Beach is now, which is right across the creek from the Hutchinson House. Bleak Hall was the major exporter of lint on Edisto Island, as well as the global supplier of bulk cotton seed for small planters who needed to buy their own seed every year because they couldn't do seed selection. They were an absolute titan in the sea island cotton industry. I believe they hold the record for the most expensive bale of sea island cotton ever sold. It's rumored that Queen Victoria bought all of her cotton directly from the Bleak Hall Plantation. So if there was any strain to be preserved and any strain the USDA would want to work with to try and create better cottons, Bleak Hall's at the very top of the list. Additionally, in this article back over here on the right, what I've got circled right there in the middle is that they had a strain of Bleak Hall Sea Island that they were maintaining for back crosses. And if you're maintaining a strain for back crosses, that means you want a pure strain that you can then, hybridize a hybrid with to try and get the characteristics of that original parent plant to get into this hybrid. So they were maintaining a pure strain of Bleak Hall cotton so that they could hybridize with it. So they were using that as kind of the baseline as the cotton they wanted, or the cotton with the characteristics they wanted to get in their hybrids. In about 1994, all of this information was digitized in the cotton collection. The seeds were originally, from what I got from the USDA folks, they had originated in Georgia, and they had kind of moved between different collections over the years until everything was finally consolidated in 1994 in College Station, Texas at the cotton collection. they said that the rest of the information on this cotton was on handwritten index cards in a shoebox in Phil's office, and he's not here right now. And so they don't know where the records are. They're in the USDA facility, but they've never been digitized, so at some point someone needs to actually find that, and that is the smoking gun. When that's done, that'll tell us exactly where these seeds came from, so I need to bug the USDA people some more. That shoebox is somewhere. So this 2001 genetic study was also huge. I was not expecting that this was out there, that someone had already done this work, and out of the hundreds and hundreds of cotton strains that are in the USDA's facility, someone went out of their way for this study trying to check historical and modern cottons and how they're related to pull out specifically Bleak Hall and Sea Island cotton to use in this test. Of all the Sea Island cottons, they picked just these two. So whoever was in this facility probably had that shoebox on their desk, and they knew what this was the real deal. Again, don't quite have the smoking gun, but it smells like sulfur in here. And there's an empty holster, so. So anyway, from that point, in 2015, Bill McLean read Dr. Porcher's book. In there, Dr. Porcher concludes that Sea Island cotton was extinct. It had been hybridized into extinction. And that no one had maintained it, and that he could not find any records anywhere indicating that it had been preserved. And like I said, the records for this Bleak Hall strain had never been digitized, so unless Porcher went directly to the USDA facility and found that shoebox, he couldn't have known that this was the real deal Sea Island cotton. But anyway, Bill didn't believe that. He got on Google, found this National Plant Germplasm System, recognized the Bleak Hall name because he was friends with Bernie Maybank, who lives at Point of Pines, which is right next to Bleak Hall. And so he ordered them up, and they just sent seeds to his house. Not an agricultural researcher. So, but anyway, he grew out the 25 seeds they sent at Point of Pines Plantation, which is right down the street from the Hutchinson house. It's strange how small the world is. From what he could tell from the plants that he grew out, they were morphologically pretty much identical to the historical accounts of Sea Island cotton. So he partnered with Charleston County Parks and Rec and grew out a 1/4 acre of plants at McLeod Plantation Historic Site on James Island. 1/4 acre is an absolutely massive amount of cotton for a couple of volunteers to take care of at a county site where they're not getting paid to be in the beating sun all day. So that really didn't work out all that well, and since then Charleston County Parks has scaled down to about 10 plants, much more common. But from that he got a quote, a double bag full of seeds, and so from that I got my Ziploc bag. So my seeds were 3 generations removed from the USDA seed stock. And that's where all my research started there in 2019. So at the start of my project, I had 2 goals. They were very simple. Don't kill all of them and get the fluffy white stuff. And so I started out by staking a 25 by 25 foot plot. The soil there was fertile, it needed very minimal amendment. I put up deer fencing preemptively because I only had 1 shot at this. And I followed the historical accounts of all the cultivation practices I could. Everything I did in this plot was all done by hand except for the initial tilling of the soil. I had a rototiller do that because I'm not that masochistic. I formed all the beds and all the alleys by hand, and I did all the work after that with just bare hand tools. I had a lot more free time back then. So I had high sloped beds, as you can see over here, and the plants were not irrigated apart from hand watering about once a week. And because at this point, I didn't have any of this provenance research done yet. I did all that in about the first 9 months of the project. But when I was building this out in about January and February, I had just read Porcher's book, and I was going to get as much data as I could, every single drop of data I could squeeze out of these plants that I could to prove whether or not this was the real deal Sea Island cotton. So in order to minimize my effort, I only planted 52 plants. That's what I could spare from the original. Bill gave me about 250 seeds. So I planted about that's about 200 of those. My rows were spaced 6 foot apart. The beds were about 18 inches tall. They were dug down about 9 inches and then piled up about 9 inches higher. And I put the plants about 18 inches apart on those beds. Additionally, I couldn't really find conclusive information on how deep to actually plant the seeds. So I varied planting depth within each individual space. So I had seeds at 2 inches, 1 inch, half an inch, and 1/4 of an inch. A Sea Island cotton seed is a very big seed, so it assumedly wants to be very deep in the soil. But Porcher's accounts list that it being 2 to 4 inches underground, which no one puts anything 4 inches underground unless it's an avocado or coconut. So I didn't believe that, so I had to kind of figure that out on my own. So 2 inches to 1/4 of an inch seemed like a very good middle ground that hit all the high notes. My plot was partially fertilized and irrigated. I wanted to figure out how much of an impact modern chemical fertilizers as well as irrigation would have on the growth of the plant, because historically they didn't have a lot of access to fertilizers. They really started drilling into that a little bit later, just before the Civil War as well as after the war. They had access to some more modern fertilizers by then, but really early on they didn't have fertilizer. The soil was just good soil, and they didn't have any irrigation. They weren't doing any of the irrigation like they do in Australia, where they flood the whole field underneath the cotton and allow it to soak into the soil. These were just dryland plants. So I had 2 of the rows fertilized, and then one of those fertilized rows was watered, and a different unfertilized row was also watered. Additionally, I just controlled weeds uniformly, because most of the weeds that we had out there, they didn't have historically, so there would be really no experimental evidence, or no real beneficial information to gain by not controlling the weeds. So here I am forming the beds and alleys. There's my boss supervising very well. There are the final built beds down there. They were very high when I started out. I slowly leveled them a little bit. The soil, this is my soil test. This is really good soil for South Carolina. It's not best, not everything is right there in the middle, but I mean the pH was really good. All the nutrients were pretty much banging in the center, so I've not seen anything better yet in the low country. It only really needed a few things. We always need sulfur down here in our thin sandy soils. It's one of those, that nitrogen or nutrients that just kind of escape from the soil naturally. So it never hurts to add a bit more. Additionally, cotton is sensitive to boron as well as manganese, so I applied roach killer, which is just straight orthoboric acid. You just need like a teaspoon for the entire plot. That's all they needed. And about 1 to 2 ounces of manganese as well to supply all the manganese. They put manganese sulfate, which also includes sulfur. And then for the rest of my sulfur, I used a pH neutral calcium sulfate, aka crushed up dental models, because my mom worked for an orthodontist. So I got them for those go into every one of my gardens. They're exciting when you have volunteers pulling weeds and then the whole dental casting comes out of the ground. But irrigation, in quotes, I just had a driven Sandpoint well. Wasn't very great. If you can, don't do that if you don't have to. It takes like 10 minutes to fill up a 5-gallon bucket. You get one really big arm to it as well. By golly, after a month, they had all germinated. And so here are the really young plants. This is hilling, which is what I did to kind of clear up the weeds just around the young plants, as well as mound up dirt around them to stabilize their stems so that they didn't flop over and get bent in the breeze. Here is sort of the progression of the growth going from left and down over to the right. So this covers about 6 months of growth here, and that about 4.5 months of growth, until I had the first bull picked. Here is the development of the flowers and the bulbs. The developing flower bud is called a square. Once you can start to see the petals, it's then called a candle. And from there, it's just a flower. And then the fruit, developing fruit, as well as the open fruit, is called a bulb. And as you see up here, it's a very pretty pastel yellow flower with this deep crimson stem in it. My cotton plants have a very closed up flower. Certain strains had a closed flower, and certain strains, like the initial slide I had a much more open hibiscus-like flower. But from what I can tell, having a closed up flower is far more indicative of sea island cotton than a lot of, say, upland cottons, which are more hibiscus-like. The flower of the plant actually resembles okra a fair bit. That first year I had a lot of people come and ask me why I was growing all this okra out here. That was fun to tell them it was sea island cotton. But the flower is only open for a day. After the second day, it turns this sort of pink magenta color. And then after the second day, it just sort of turns brown, shrivels up, and then falls off. And then it takes about 7 weeks for the bulb itself to mature and finally open. And here is the sea island cotton blend that I was able to get from that first plant. Measurement is about 1 9/16, which means it meets the criteria for extra long staple cotton. And the fibers are incredibly fine. That is some of the gin lint that's had the seeds removed. It is just beautiful. I have a treat for y'all. I have a bag of cotton that I'm going to let y'all pass around. So, I'm going to pass around the couple handfuls of this, and please don't steal it, I don't have a lot. But just feel how soft this is compared to a cotton ball. I'm sure we've all held a cotton ball before in our lives. You can about use those things as scouring pads. This is like, our friend Chris Allen over at the Reconstruction Era Museum calls this vegetarian silk. It is absolutely nothing like upland cotton. And that's because the fiber is about half as thick and about twice as long. And that is really what people were growing this for. Once you feel this in your hand, once you look at it, you realize why this was so different than upland cotton, why people cared about this so much. This was kind of the pivotal moment for me. Having this in my hand, I almost cried. I didn't, man, I didn't cry, but I almost did. Additionally, if you look at it, this stuff is a little bit woolly because it's been passed around about 20 times now at this point, but when it was freshly ginned, it was just like a cloud. And it has this sort of iridescent, sort of peach color to it that is just something very special. And that's in the historical reports as what fresh cotton looked like. Because this actually comes with natural oils on it, which really give it that luster and really improve its spinability as a thread.
This is the bag of your homegrown?
Yep. Yep. As opposed to Bill's. So in 2019, growing an heirloom crop for the first time in 80 years that no one knows how to grow anymore didn't come without its own difficulties. So the deeper planted seeds actually survived better. They did better early on, but they became trapped in the soil after a light rain. So it ended up being that the best of both worlds were the seeds planted at about half an inch to closer to an inch depth. So far, I've kind of standardized on doing half inch to 3/4 of an inch with all my plantings going forward. And I've had about 90% germination success thus far. I had a spring drought in May, which was really devastating to the young plants because that's right when they needed water the most, and it just stopped raining, and plants kind of like water a little bit. So that then exacerbated the weed issue as well as pests and other diseases. And additionally, I did have some issues with nutrient deficiency. The plants that I didn't fertilize did significantly worse than the plants I did fertilize, so that is in fact something I would need to do going forward. As well as the drought also caused a lot of bolt drop. Not having the boron in the slow release form, as well as the manganese, also induced a little bit of boll rot or boll drop, and then stink bugs began feeding on the bolls, which induced boll rot, which caused an immune response, which caused the plants to drop their bolls as well. The stink bug inoculation with boll rot is a reoccurring problem that I will rant about here in a minute, but turns out the historical cultivation techniques, doing everything by hand in the beating sun, takes a lot of time, and it's pretty hard. So this was an early disease I had to deal with, which was called sortian, which is the sort of blackening of the base of the stem. It girdles the plant by infecting the vascular cambrium. This is really only a problem if the plants are droughty and they're not able to grow quickly. If they're able to grow fast, they can grow faster than the sortian can girdle them, and it's not an issue. It really only affects the plants when they're really young. After that, it's a non-issue. So this was something that proved to me that having irrigation when the plants were young, when it didn't rain, was absolutely crucial to getting their early survival and get them up out the ground to the point where they could establish a taproot and become self-sustaining. Boll rot was a really big problem. Early on, I thought it was a lack of boron that was causing boll rot, because boron is very necessary to the development of the young seeds. However, I eventually figured out that it was stink bugs. And so the stink bugs were climbing under because the boll rot was just on one side of the boll. And it was really strange because the rest, I would get one locule out of the whole thing that would be good, but then one of them would be half rotten and one would just be this absolute nasty brown slime. And it was because the stink bugs were just feeding on one side of the cotton boll. They would crawl up underneath it, underneath one of these bracts at the base of the fruit, and they would hide in the shade and feed on the developing boll. And they would carry bacteria on their exterior and in their saliva that then infects the boll, and so then that induces boll rot. And I have not yet found a great solution for the stink bugs. They kind of have a flush in about June and July, and then all of their natural pests and predators catch up and then control them from that point on. But there's kind of a first wave that gets rid of about the first third of my cotton crop. And then they become a minor pest after that. Hurricane Dorian blew through by the time I got to Edisto with its tropical storm, but I was really surprised at how well the plants held up. I don't think I lost a single leaf off the plants, but a couple of them got bent over a little bit, but that was it. From 2019, I collected a ton of data because I also wanted to try seed selection, and I was able to do that the first year, but I've kind of stopped doing that after that because the plants were just so homogeneous. You know, this cultivar has been improved for 150 years, and at this point, they've kind of beat all the rogue genes out of these plants. Plus, I was starting with such a small group of seeds to begin with that there's really not a whole lot that can go wrong in just a couple of years. But I did try and do seed selection the first year, and I did that for my 2020 crop, just to make sure that whatever I was getting from the USDA was the best of the best that I was going forward with. From that, my germination rate was 81% this first year. It was 92% for the seeds that were planted only a quarter of an inch in the ground. They grew faster, or they germinated more reliably, but the deeper seeds did better when they did get out of the ground. The average height of my plants in this field was 60 inches, which is about here. The tallest plant I had was 78 inches up here. So these are big, leggy plants. They're not like modern upland cottons that are about this high. You know, when on good soils, they'll hit 10 foot tall. The plants, once they're up out of the ground, they take about 17 days to germinate on average. It takes about 100 days once they germinate to then produce a flower. That flower takes about 56 days to then turn into an open bulb. I also learned that fertilizing the plants and irrigating them, turns out plants like fertilizer being irrigated. So, who'd have thought? And so from that, I learned I could make my bed shorter. The high beds really weren't all that advantageous if I was going to go to a more modern cultivation practice. Fertilizer is going to help. Weed barriers are going to help because, boy, there were a lot of weeds. And drip irrigation would also be immense for increasing their productivity. Additionally, the other problem I ran into is how am I supposed to get the seeds out of this stuff because no one's been building roller cotton gins for the last 8 years. So I went to reverse engineering patent drawings from France from the 1800s, and that is one of the results of that process. But the seed had to be dried because the seed naturally contains water coming out of the fruit. So what that resulted in for me was I put them in a crocus sack and left them in my car for a couple of months, and that dried them out pretty good. I had to sort the cotton. So once I pulled it out after it had been dried, I had to pick out all of the immature seeds, the pieces of grass or bits of stem or leaves and any other stained lint that managed to get in there. Then I whipped them, which is where I fluffed up the cotton to facilitate the ginning process. Then I gin them, which is where you feed them into the gin. It pulls the fiber off the seeds and separates the fiber from the seeds. And then I molded the fiber after the fact, which is where I pulled out any bits of seed coat that made its way through or any stained lint. And so here is the sort of treadle-powered gin that I first built. And this is what I'm currently using to process the cotton when I get a good crop. I use that when I just have a deeper crop. But it's based off of an old So Easy treadle. It's got custom-built rollers, and it's kind of just hacked together and assembled, but it works on one half of the rollers, so it's good enough right now. Eventually I'll get to it. Right here I'm demonstrating it off of treadle power. Turns out I do not have the hand-eye coordination to use both hands to feed cotton into that while also trying to run a treadle that's been rusting for 10 years. And so I eventually switched to an electric treadle, and that worked very, very much better. So this is the actual ginning process. You see how little effort it takes to actually separate it. It just kind of goes in there and pulls the fiber right off. There's no fight, no fuss. Here's the fiber just getting spit out the backside of the roller. That's the beauty and the simplicity of the roller gin. All you have to do is just have a way to tension it and have a way to power it, and really you just have two rolling pins sitting on top of each other. And there's the gin seeds. There's processed fiber.
And are those viable seeds for you?
Yep. So that's how you get your next. And if you want to separate, really want to get fancy and separate the rest of the lint from the seeds to give them the best chance of germination, you can dip them in sulfuric acid for a split second, and all the fiber just disappears. Don't get battery acid on your shirt. I've ruined so many shirts. So this is the do-it-yourself cotton gin I built over there for anyone who wants to do this for some reason. But I put that out there because I had a lot of people asking me about how they could build a gin, because some people want to play around with that because it's hard to get a hold of a saw gin. But roller gin will work on a lot of roller gin of that size is great for a cottage industry for folks who are working with heirloom long staple cottons. So I built this thing and put that up there, and that's on our website now. In 2020, I made a lot of changes. I added weed barriers. I also experimented with perennial plants. And I also cajoled my uncle into allowing me to plant some cotton plants on his middle of his farm in modern agricultural practices. But the long and short of it was, weed barriers are nice. If you fertilize the plants and supply them water, they get really, really tall, really fast. And the perennial plants didn't do a thing. There's some sort of strange quirk about this tropical plant that's been converted to an annual. When you let them go, when you let them freeze, they don't regenerate from the ground. And so I pulled these plants back up in like November, and they were still alive as a rootstock. Only like 25% had put out any leaves, and not one of them had gotten more than a foot tall. So the perennial plants, if you can't have them in a greenhouse, they're not worth anything. Additionally, I didn't put the deer fence back up. That was a terrible mistake. The deer came in and ruined everything. So I learned my lesson there. 2021, I put up a deer fence, and the deer got in anyway. Tore everything up again. Additionally, my uncle wasn't impressed with the cotton plot, so I didn't replant it there, so I'll have to find a different spot in this field at some point that's not in the way of everything else. Additionally, I made a crop at the King's Market plot, but it wasn't a great crop because I made a terrible mistake when I planted it. I put it right in between a weedy ditch and a row of zinnias and sunflowers, which are the two things that stink bugs love the most. So I had a max exodus every morning and every night of stink bugs going through them, so I had immense bull drop and bull rot. But I still managed to make a pretty good crop out of it because the plants were just so huge and doing so well. 2022, I got really serious. I put in-ground irrigation in. I put landscape fabric across everything, so I no longer had to mow and weed eat between the rows. And I put up a serious metal wire deer fence. It was electric fence wire. It wasn't electrified though, because I didn't want to electrocute any tourists who kept trying to get in there and take the spot. One thing I did not account for is I used a lower gauge white landscape fabric to try and decrease water stress during the day, as well as it's just cheaper than doing a really heavy 20-year fabric I was doing before. What I didn't anticipate is that it wasn't getting hot enough under there to kill off the weeds, and so it worked like a mini greenhouse that was pumping gallons of water. And all the weeds worked like a million little hydraulic jacks that lifted the fabric. Pulled all 600 of my 12-inch sod staples out of the ground, which were double pinned on this fabric. So I had to cut the irrigation off at the hottest time of the year to kill the weeds underneath it, and then the deer also got it. And so it didn't do all that great, but the plants themselves looked pretty good, the ones that got there. 2023 was actually a pretty good year. I learned that sea island cotton is very sensitive to 2,4-D herbicide. I was using that to spray some of the weeds coming up in the walking trails. And just a tiny amount of drift on a slightly windy day got in there, and it just did this really strange abnormal strapping behavior that deforms some of the flowers and leaves. So we are no longer doing that anywhere on the property. Additionally, which really about it. Other than stink bugs continue to be a problem, and I just didn't have the time last year to really pick it. So I only got about a third of what I made last year picked before I got stuck in the office for 6 months straight. I'm still stuck in the office. It's a miracle I'm here right now. But this year in 2024, I went back to my 2019 seed stock. I had been using the 2020 seed stock, just trying to see how long the seeds were being viable. This year I went back to the 2019 seed stock. I just planted in April of 2022. The germination rate was now based off of 5-year seeds. And it looks like not going to be very good this year. I didn't prep the bed all that well, and I was using a much older seed stock, so I only have about 35% germination this year, so I'm going to go back in and replant some of these spaces here in the next couple of weeks. But so far, other than that, no issues, fingers crossed, and the deer have stayed out since last year. I put up a different fence, and I mowed all the grass around it, so the deer no longer have a reason to go near the cotton plot, so that's fingers crossed. So for the future, we're going to be using this for our historical interpretation outreach at the site. There's possibly a short book in the works if I can ever find the time to consolidate all of my notes together. We are also looking into marketable product possibilities to help fundraise for the house. Thinking about cotton reeds or potentially, making a handkerchief with some of the fiber, something we can do as a niche fundraising opportunity. Turns out cotton reeds are illegal because they contain viable seed and they violate the Boll warranty program. If you ask the USDA, they tell you you can't do that. So just don't ask if you're going to do that. That's my pro tip. I've been collaborating with some R&D departments and some researchers trying to get someone else to look into this, drill into the tensile strength of the fibers, really look into the genetics. So far, none of that has bared any results. I'm also trying to cultivate partnerships with small farmers, enthusiasts, and other historical sites to further the study and interpretation of this crop. And as far as finding a use for the finished fiber, hand spinning Sea Island cotton takes an absolute immense amount of skill. There were people who spent their entire lives training just to spin this. So me trying to do that in my garage in my spare time is absolutely not a possibility. And then I have to leave it after that. So if we're going to do anything with this, we're going to have to engage in this machine spinning and weaving facility to try and make some test thread and some test fiber. And I just haven't gotten around to doing that yet. Currently at this point, I have enough to maybe make 2 handkerchiefs. So don't have a lot of cotton gin already. I have some various research topics I want to look into further. I don't think anyone has acquired the Seabrook accession and proven out whether or not that is actually a real Sea Island cotton, but it looks like it probably is. Selective breeding could be done to really bring back some of the consistency and the fiber quality that may have been lost over the last 80 years of just being maintained in a cryo storage accession. Perennial plants, I would love to see how long fiber quality can be maintained on a plant grown perennially in a greenhouse. Over time, does the quality degrade? Do you really have to grow these plants annual to make a really high yielding crop, a really fine quality lint? Or could you potentially grow these in a greenhouse and just have them as a perennial and produce every single year and get the same quality? Additionally, I'd love to sell cotton reeds because that would make us a lot of money, but I have to figure out a way to invisibly sterilize the seeds without damaging the bolls themselves. Turns out you can microwave them. I found that out. They smell a bit funny, but the bowl works just the same. I'd love to get technical analysis of the fiber characteristics. I would love to finalize all my improvements for the cotton gins. There may be a way that this could be mechanically harvestable. If that can be done, this could come back as a crop. Right now, you have to hand pick Sea Island cotton. The locules are very tightly bound and they're very hard packed into the actual bowls. So it requires, 2, if not 3 fingers getting out there and pulling every single locule out. You can't just run a mechanical harvester down the field like you can with modern upland cotton. And I would really love someone to do a really more rigorous genetic analysis. I need to get a grad student or something to work on that. So my conclusions and takeaway is that Sea Island cotton is extinct no more, probably. It's being grown on Edisto Island as well as James Island. It's integral to the interpretation of our Lowcountry history, and its cultivation comes with a unique host of challenges. Some parting preemptive answers before we get to Q&A is that this is not a business venture. I'm not marketing any products. I'm not looking for investors. I'm not looking for business partners. I'm not looking for job offers. I'm not selling raw land. You can't pay me to grow cotton. I don't have any land. I don't have any equipment. If you want to support the project, please volunteer or donate to the Edisto Island Land Trust. Please designate it to the tractor fund. Need a tractor. And additionally, because of the boll weevil quarantine, I am not able to sell, give, or trade cottonseed within the state of South Carolina. Under South Carolina state law, it is illegal for me to distribute cottonseeds or live plants. There are proper channels to do so and be permitted to BAC, distributor, and producer. It's a lot of paperwork, it's a lot of time, it costs some money. I don't have any of that right now. It can be done, but I am not in the capacity that I am able to distribute seed. Additionally, this is a public strain. If you are a genuine researcher, you can request this directly from the USDA, and they will be able to send you seeds for bona fide research purposes. With that,
stay on time, but anybody have any questions, stand up and speak up, so I don't have to repeat the question, so that everyone else
I
can.
have a question.
Yes.
Hearing all your difficulties of growing this crop, do you think that's why they had to slash and burn all of Edisto to get rid of any potential predators or streams of bugs, they just had to clear the whole land so they could be successful in growing this crop?
I don't think that was their motivating factor, but that definitely helped. Didn't know we practically drove the white-tailed deer to extinction by the 1930s. There were basically no deer on Edisto Island back then, so the deer were never a problem. And the stink bugs, I think, have spread just through agriculture over the last century. They're not documented anywhere in historical texts that I've seen, so I think they're a more recent introduction in South Carolina. As far as things like, say, nutsedge and other reeds, they just weren't here during that time. So the difficulties they were dealing with, I know that crabgrass was an issue back then. I've seen that in some historical turn of the century reports. But for the most part, the pests just weren't here yet.
Next question. Yes.
Yeah, it's a great talk. Given the commercial importance of sea island cotton in that era, how does that compare to, let's say, the information that's available for other commercial important crops? You know, corn, right? How does that compare? I mean, how much digging did you have to do to find this data?
Not a lot. It was an incredibly economically important crop. So there's a ton of agricultural bulletins and journals. Stuff before the Civil War is much harder to find, but kind of in the 1880s, all the way up to the present day, there was a lot of research and a lot of publication done on this. I've read a good number of agricultural journals and bulletins from, like, say, the Southern Agricultural Society and that kind of stuff. A lot of it's really interesting. They were dealing with a lot of the same issues I'm dealing with, a lot of issues I'm not dealing with, but it's kind of digging into it. There's a lot of chaff that you have to sort through to find what you're looking for, because it's mostly a bunch of farmers complaining about things and speculating about the market. So, Google's character ID recognition system and the Google Books archive is a godsend, because if I was doing it the way Portia was doing it, I would have gone crazy.
Any other questions? Yes.
Can you contrast the growth of cotton with contrast to, say, Carolina gold rice?
As far as an industry or the plant itself?
Yes.
Well, Carolina gold started much earlier in the 1600s, so we probably had about 100 years plus on sea island cotton as a crop. Additionally, Carolina gold kind of disappeared after the Civil War because it was absolutely reliant on slave labor in order to be able to grow it at scale. Sea island cotton fared much better as a small, independent, kind of 10 to 40 acre kind of crop. Sea island cotton was, although it was picky, it was very easy to grow. Carolina gold rice required really well-built, large, engineered, like perfectly constructed rice impoundments to be able to be grown efficiently and at cost, or at with a lot of value per pound for it, to reduce costs. That's the word I was looking for. As far as the plants themselves, Carolina gold was grown, it was a wetland plant. It was grown pretty much in muck and to standing water at certain times of the year, and they need to be able to flood those fields seasonally. Sea island cotton was purely an upland crop. So the two never competed for farmland, and so they were kind of perfect sister crop, cash crops to each other.
Any other? I have one that I think you should ask, is what's a gin? And why do you use it as a verb and a noun? Like to gin it, or it is a gin. It comes from a medieval word, engine.
Oh.
So it's a mechanical device, because obviously the medievals didn't have gasoline engines, but they had mechanical devices. So with that, we've got one more. Thank you for that.
I'm a member of the history group, and I just have a few comments before we leave. I want to thank everyone for attending tonight, and of course we have people that attended last night. I want to thank Laura for going ahead and videotape this, because it's our intent to go ahead and share this in the future for people that were not able to attend. I want to thank Rob for going and setting this up, and obviously I want to thank Tom Austin, on behalf of and again, as Anna said before, if anyone was interested in being a member of the history group, it is a very good group. I really enjoyed it. As you see Anna's after the meeting, you can see, oh, I got mine backwards. But I mean, the members that are here, we just have this for the group. And the last thing I have, I know a couple of people volunteered. As you know, if you're in the park house, we've got all these chairs here. Allison was kind enough to donate about half of these chairs. They're actually not Habersham, they're actually belong to Allison. So the people that are staying, please see me before you move any of the chairs, because we have to make sure we do not get the Habersham chairs mixed up with Allison's chairs. So thank you very much.
Thank you.